All right, I think we're ready now. Wow, this mic is loud. By the way, if you were wondering, we were trying to do some seating arrangement up here in real time, which was really interesting to watch, I'm sure, from the audience. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're kind of on the last day here. Super excited to be here. Just wanted to share a little bit of where we're going strategically, where the Army's moving, and really talk a little bit about the network. I'm going to spend a little time today. I think we really want to focus on operationally what's happening, and then kind of our new approach to delivering capability and really putting a lot of the unified network portfolio under PEOC3T and what that's going to mean from a capability delivery perspective. But just to start and give some context on where we are in the story, I think a big thing to think about is a real big move. The Army's making really big bets on getting the unified network kind of up and running and moving in a different direction. Part of that is a real hard push to centralized delivery of service, which is going to look and feel a little bit different, but it really is about getting after increasing our security posture, right, and getting customer delivery in a much better way, right? Really fixing that user experience across the board. I do want to spend a little bit of time before we keep going because I think we're organized here in a very interesting way. This also includes the rest of the .m LPFP, right? So really focusing on a lot of policy work from CIO, really focused on laying down some of the base policies and guidance for a lot of the emerging technology and a lot of the emerging work we have out there. I think it's a piece that we've kind of been missing over the last couple of years, and this really has been about, you know, when we want to talk about DevSecOps, let's make sure we've got the right guidance out in place. I know some of you have already seen some of the work we've put out on software containers. I think the other piece is rethinking and reimagining how we do cloud acquisition, right? So relaxing some of the constraints that were out there and refocusing that to give some flexibility out to commands and to PEOs to move faster. I think you're going to see a lot more of that moving forward, but the real key being is getting some of those initial policies and guidance out there to really give us some running room. And as we unify the network and start delivering services in a centralized way, really start getting that moving forward in a much faster way. That being said, I think that's a good start, and I'll let General Barrett kind of kick it off and let you know where we're going operationally.
Been sitting down for a while now. We'll start with central delivery of services. It sounds like that's just about being more efficient. It is about operating more efficiently and delivering a product that is better for everybody in the Army. But I mean everybody. That means from the edge all the way back to the installation. But it's also about making sure that we do this in a secure and defensible manner, and when there is an issue, that we can work very quickly across the network in order to defend. By the network, I mean it is the tactical networks. It is the cloud and everything that we've got with ECMA. It is the traditional on-prem network that we have. It is going to be our operational technology that we have. All of this has to be, if you treat any of these things as a separate entity, from a security standpoint, defensibility standpoint, we're going to be in trouble. So this central delivery of services is not only about centralizing everything with NetCom operating it. Our cyber is the central organization for the cybersecurity component, but it also allows us to see the network in a way that we haven't been able to before. It starts with collapsing networks and bringing those central services underneath one umbrella, such as the National Guard, the reserves, MI, NIPR, SIPR, right? And ECMA. And yes, the tactical network. I'm going to keep coming back to that. Someday we're not going to refer to this as the tactical network and the enterprise network. It'll be one network. But today we are already receiving the defensive endpoint security data from tactical networks all the way into a regional cyber center for them to do that analysis and the defense of those networks. This now becomes also about taking the complexity off of those soldiers downrange and bringing it up to a level which is sustainable and defensible. I talked about being able to see the network and seeing it at a layer that probably we've never been able to before, which is about the data. having a really good understanding of what data elements are important to us in order to defend the network and hunt adversaries on our network. Previously, you say, well, you're buying tools, aren't you, to defend the network that are doing this? But I don't think that's sufficient for the adversary that we're going to be facing tomorrow. It is going to be a very sophisticated, or today, for that matter, very sophisticated adversary. To hunt, we need data. Data to answer very specific questions. And this path that we're on is giving us the ability to answer the very specific questions at speed. Nothing is worse than being called out for an incident response and arriving somewhere where it is an empty room with no data in it. And you as the customer might ask me, well, can you tell me whether the adversary's been here or not? And no, I will never be able to tell you with any level of confidence. Not only did we get rid of the doors are wide open, the windows are wide open, there's no data for me to do any forensics on. Conversely, I have use cases where we have walked into organizations that have done everything that, best practices, NIST, White House memo have told us to do, competent workforce. Now I can tell you with moderate to high confidence that the adversary only got this far, and I'm pretty sure I know who it was. And that level of confidence for me to come back to either the customer, the chief, the secretary of the Army, General Nakasone at U.S. Cyber Command, that's the answer I want to give every single time.
Thanks, General Barrett. So it's day 3 at AUSA. I'm still excited about the network. I'm still excited. Is there? No? No?
Yeah!
Yes, thank you. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of a few programs in our portfolio that sort of live at this intersection of being the material provider for the holistic network. So first capability I want to talk about is our ICAM, our Identity and Access Management program. Today we have separated identity and access management between our tactical and our enterprise space. And I think a challenge we share between industry and the government is how do we get to a holistic network where identity and access management is a singular capability or set of capabilities, so that we're getting to what General Barrett talked about, and Leo talked about this a little bit too, so we're getting to those specific attributes so that data can be accessed in a really meaningful way based on your identity. That sounds really simple, but across this heterogeneous network, this really complicated network, it is a really big challenge for the Army. But it's not necessarily unique to the Army. There are a lot of complicated networks and a lot of complicated sort of heterogeneous infrastructures that are out there in the world. So we're asking industry to come help us do this. And so as I embark on this journey at PEOC3T of this integrated holistic network, I ask for your help in ICAM. How can we build ICAM as part of a holistic network? That you're gonna see that message from me and from General Ray during our time here in defining network modernization. Another capability or another program that we have, which is very near term, is our Unified Network Operations program. We're looking at third quarter of awarding a contract that gets after integrating our tactical space and our enterprise space in terms of how we deliver our network operations tools. So that means how we configure radios to how we defend the network, right? And exactly how General Barrett talked about, how do we then build those tools that we need in a really open way that embraces this diverse industry environment. So we're going to challenge industry. We're going to go embark upon a competitive prototype path to see what industry can provide in terms of network operations infrastructure and our ability to on-ramp and off-ramp capabilities that help us see our network, configure our network, and fight our network. The next program that I wanted to talk about, this is probably the last program I talk about, Today we have a really robust capability to do fires, AFATIDs. It works. It's a fantastic capability. But when I want to share data between coalition partners, I have to go in and hard code. I have to hard code that application to do it. It was not built for how we have to share data in the future. And so I'm going to embark with industry on a road to modernize our AFATIDs capability, to build out fires applications so that I can robustly share data, not just messages, not just really formatted things, but that I can share data so these sensor-to-shooter architectures that we're enabling can be done in a really modern way, and we're going to iterate that program to do it over time. Because we're certainly not going to displace this great thing called AFATIDs tomorrow. So we're going to go on a journey. We're going to go on a journey to build out fires applications so that we can share and more meaningfully get after our data for fires applications. And with that, I really look forward to your questions. I am really excited about my ability to be PEO C3T and define the network modernization and work with this great team. Joe Morrison, please.
Hey, I'm going to be pretty quick. I want to just leave a few distinct things in your head. So you've heard about this notion of a unified network. Been talking about it for several years now, all based off of zero trust. And it's taking it from a big idea in what was an operational framework and actually turning it into a thing. Now, I know that no network is one single thing. That's not what I'm saying. But it's taking an operational framework that was a desirement to get after long-standing problems, the ability to rapidly deploy and immediately connect back into the network and fight in a contested environment, is something we've all been talking about forever. And so as we were doing a media roundtable this morning, I was asked very directly, so what's different of what you're saying this time than what has been said in the past? And I will tell you, the big thing is that we've now taken an operational framework and we've instituted institutional change. Think about what just occurred. You had the CIO, who now has oversight of the vast majority of IT spend in our Army, working with the G6 to align and synchronize and integrate and prioritize requirements, governed and then aligning resources to it so we get after the most important things. You now have a single operational command that is responsible for the central delivery of services to operate, maintain, secure, and defend the network. And you have a single PO from a capability development perspective, material development perspective, responsible for delivering that network. That institutional change has been very, very hard. And we were very lucky under the leadership of our Undersecretary and Vice Chief of Staff, now our Chief of Staff, to conduct a series of network capability portfolio reviews that led us to very smart institutional changes. And it's allowed us to increase velocity, both from an effectiveness and from an efficiencies perspective, like never before. I'll give you a couple cases in point. We started migrating to the 365 environment on SIPR the first week of September. We are done today. Think about the speed of that action. By the end of the next calendar year, no matter where you are in our Army, you can take your laptop, plug it into the wall, and you will immediately reconnect back into the network. How many years have we been talking about the ability to move horizontally between theaters? It's a reality in Indo-PACOM today. Across all of our networks, it'll be a reality by the end of this fiscal year. Speed, getting after not just efficiencies, but operational effectiveness that improves the user experience, but we do it in a very, very secure way underneath a single operational commander. Institutional change, getting after the velocity, stealing a phrase from General Ray, getting after the velocity that we have long needed in this critical space. And as you heard our chief say yesterday, the number one priority for modernization because it underpins everything else that we want to do in terms of continuous transformation. We look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Questions? No questions? I guarantee you people have questions. Somebody's got a question. There you go, watch this.
General, when you say the Army soldiers can plug in and they're automatically in the network, does that include Army Reserve and the 54 states and territories in the National Guard?
Yes, at end state, yes, it will. It's everybody.
So, ma'am, you said end state, yes, but how? Because I remember when General Crawford, I was the full-time G6 for New Hampshire for 7 years, and General Crawford sat there at the National Guard G6 conference and said Enterprise Information Technology as a Service is going to happen. That's 2,000 locations in the National Guard.
It's when we get to that piece of the Unified Directory Service, that really is going to be key to achieving this capability. And like General Morrison said, it's already rolled out in the Pacific. Scheduled to do that with all of the networks, and that's really where you're going to, that's really what you're going to use. So there's going to be a shift in terms of where you're getting your some common services from that are going to enable those capabilities. So, yes, we're going to do it, and very close alignment with the National Guard and the Reserve leadership and their 6 shops to do this, because we fundamentally realize we can't keep doing what we have done. And when you break this down, at the end of the day, very little of it is a technical problem. Most of it is a policy control problem, and it's not technical. Technical is a small enabler to this.
The only thing I would add, right, is that we can't think of the unified network in traditional terms. You know, and we run into that problem sometimes. This central delivery of service, one of the big things we're getting after is virtualized desktop infrastructure. So it's now being delivered centrally. Quite frankly, our Compo 2 and 3 teammates are a major focus for that because of exactly what you just sat there and said. Why knock up a whole bunch of infrastructure for 2,000 sites when we can do it in a more secure way, a more effective way, virtually? And so that is a main push, but we've got to reimagine how we think about the network in terms of its traditional deployment.
Thanks. I was out late last night. Okay. Hey, Mark.
Straight to APG.
What are we doing? So we've been working with partners for a little bit now with some of the SFAB units and with partner sharing, and we're finding what are we going to do about not just the data from AFATADS for USMTF, but the base maps are potentially overly classified. You know, there is no sharing of the map.
Well, so I will make it a larger comment about our entire mission and partner environment. Our behavior in terms of classification has to change, right? I spent a part of my career with NSA where we had very, very, very robust processes for classification markings. If we're going to robustly share data, it sometimes starts with those markings, right? So fair point. I also think the technology could significantly enable the future mission partner environment as long as we don't look at it as sort of a utopic end state. We've got to make progress. The COCOMs are already doing this very robustly. And so I think at POC3T, we need to learn those lessons that the COCOMs are learning today and how we share data based on attribute identity, based on the technologies of today. So we're not building some one utopic mission partner environment. We're building targeted capabilities that get after what the commanders need. I'll pause. I'm sure Leo has something to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes right back to ICAM, right? And the criticality of getting ICAM right? That's the first one. And also changing the way we think, right? You started off by saying getting a USMTF message, and I was like, oh boy, right? Because I was thinking, why are we even talking about USMTF, right? We should be talking about exactly what Mark was saying, right? Which is kind of making data a little bit more ubiquitously available, right? And making it available through an API that you can bring it into the appropriate system, right? And I understand the standards and what's going on in that space, but I think the bigger thing is rethinking this problem. But back to the ICAM piece, to do this at scale, because we try to make data problems policy issues, and a lot of times, whether it be the IC or even conventional force, we know how to minimize data and make it available to folks. But it's so dependent on us getting the attribute piece right and making sure that whether it be the US person or a coalition partner, that we can get the data to them. That's really kind of that linchpin of the entire effort, is to really get that piece up and running and make that ubiquitous, right? From what we call today the enterprise to tactical, and what we really mean is across the entire network fabric.
Okay, and just to follow on that comment with partner data sharing or partner working with our partners better, we're finding, just working with NATO and working with the SFABs, and is that sometimes these people, they don't have what we would consider a minimum set of capabilities really to do work with us. So is it possible we can just field them a kit and then worry about connecting to them? Have we considered giving them a cloud with capabilities that's theirs, since they're going to be in the driver's seat of a lot of the future fights?
You notice everybody hesitated there for a second and handed me the mic. Yeah. I got to go back to what Mark was sitting there saying. So in some cases, I wouldn't say we gave them a cloud, but there have certainly been times in the past for key missions or operational partners that we needed where we enhanced their capabilities so that we could operate together. I mean, anybody that's been around for more than a hot minute remembers the old L&O days where we'd actually send kit out so that they could get connected. That is not something we formalize as a part of this is how we're going to be operating. Got to go back to what Mark was sitting there saying. It's the bite size, and I don't mean small, but we got to be very targeted in what it is we're trying to get after. MPE, let's be candid with ourselves, has become to mean everything to everybody, right? And until we really get past the fact that it isn't going to be everything to everybody, because all of our allies and partners are different, our information sharing agreements are different, and until we fully realize a robust zero trust environment, we've got to be on a bit of a more targeted journey as opposed to going 0 to 60. We've also got to build off of what our combatant commanders are already starting to implement, and then how can we drag that down to enable land operations? Notice I didn't say enable the Army, to enable land operations. Because some of the instantiations that are out there are actually not optimized for land operations. They're optimized for maritime and air, as an example. So it's a bit of a work to do. I will tell you, there's a lot of requirements work to do. And we've got to really start leveraging OSD, the Joint Staff, and our combatant command partners to help us on that portion of the journey. A service can't solve this by ourselves.
I think that's so important, and I'll give you an example. So 90 days ago, we were able to get mapped, chipped out data and released to a partner at the completely unclassified data with an intelligence system in real time. Like, that was a thing that happened, right? And what did it do? It informed the requirements for the next generation capabilities. So part of this too is kind of working through some of those reps to understand whether either A, we need to go up to OSD and do some policy type work, or maybe we just didn't think that that requirement was a thing when we first started the process. And I think that's what we're finding is a lot of these exercises and experimentation is informing these requirements and really kind of beefing up what it's going to look like across our capabilities.
Just one last thing, because Mark triggered another thought too that's really, really important. We got to start thinking about information and data differently. And all too often we think about it by a classification level. You know, U.S. secret, you know, SecRel, TS, unclassed. It really, especially in a fight, needs to be all about the perishability of that information. That needs to be the driver of how we think about sharing information. Then we can worry about later about stripping off things for TS, et cetera. But that is a different mindset. And you've heard us long talk about sensitive but unclassified encrypted. We want to maximize that space. We still get the level of protection that we need, but it's all based off of the echelons that we're going to employ it and how perishable that information is. And so thinking about information and data in that context is really one that we've got to sort of open our aperture on.
Hi, I'm Robert Sims, Air Alliance Industries is a small business, currently supporting logistics, Marine Corps logistics IT modernization and portfolio management. Question, well, first off, looking from the sidelines, it's amazing to see the velocity that the Army's been operating on for fielding of service, et cetera. Question I'm looking at from a joint perspective is for the speed and the initiatives that you have. From your point of view, how are you all working with the DoD in the development of a combined JADC2, particularly for like fires and also logistics information?
Well, I'll jump on the logistics information piece here, right? I think there's a significant impetus in the Army to go after predictive logistics on our ground combat platforms. And that capability kind of lives at the intersection on the acquisition side across ground combat, network, our applications. And so it has sort of wide-ranging impacts in terms of how we would deliver a logistics capability. I'm excited about it because I think it offers significant opportunity, but at the same time, there are real challenges in going after that, which I'm sure the Marine Corps is kind of encountering already. And so while I think we're making a lot of progress, there's still a lot of progress to be made, and predictive logistics is one of the areas where I think we're gonna get after, sort of some sort of capability journey in how we see these ground combat platforms, execute predictive logistics, and how does that save us money, and how does that get after a meaningful capability? And hopefully I touched on a little bit of what you were talking about.
I would just add a couple different things. So first off, at the strategic and operational levels, I feel very comfortable. General Barrett and I meet with the DISA director and his team, and our technicians meet all the time. And where we pursue an Army-only solution, we make sure that it fully integrates with the joint architecture that DISA is putting up at the higher end. At the tactical level, it's events like Project Convergence that really drive that warfighting integration. But as you know, the next fight against a near peer ally, it's going to take all of those levels, strategic, operational, and tactical, to come together. That's really the power of what Project Convergence does, is it runs that whole string for us to make sure that we stay aligned.
Yeah, this actually happens to relate to the previous question. I'm Peter Santana at IBM Research. So the question for you is, one of the common complaints we hear from the DoD is how siloed the data are across different agencies. And I don't know how easy it is to get data even across the Army agencies, right? Forget the JADC2 context. So the kinds of control you're talking about, is that going to make it very easy to integrate data across different sites of the operation, so you can do any kind of modeling without worrying about where is the data going to come from, who's going to complain about it, because without a good coherent set of data, you can't do much with any kind of AI machine learning models.
Yeah, and I'll only start by saying I've been doing this a long time, and integrating data has never been easy, at least in the Army, right? And And so, again, I think now that there is more data available, logistics is a great example, right? There is so much of data that is potential, right? How do we choose the right data? How do we integrate the right commander needed data and then present that in a meaningful way? I don't think that's easy at all. However, I think we are starting on a journey to get after that, mainly based on some of the services that were talked about already today, on our cloud first strategy for delivering cloud capability and being able to aggregate. Sometimes it's just as simple as aggregating data, right? And Leo's ready to jump in here, so I'm going to pause.
I still want to jump in on this. Look, I think the big thing is, and governance too, right? We don't often talk about this, right? It's not just like, hey, make the data available, we're good to go. I think a lot of this is, we've put in place the Army Data Board, where we're seeing warfighting mission areas really at different levels of maturity, but trying to mature them together. I think the space that we're kind of like way out in front right now really is, so when we look across our business systems, right? Maybe a little bit easier than warfighting, but definitely still siloed. We see a lot of forward momentum in this space, and just a fundamental understanding that the data's got to be shared ubiquitously, and I think we're making a lot of headway there. Part of this too is opening the aperture up. I think historically we've built a lot of siloed systems. I think moving forward, a little bit of a different approach, even on the business system side. It's not just a realization that the data's shared, it's a realization that we have to do some, real life hard system engineering collapse, right? Like start converging some of the capabilities and data sets. And I think the last piece to that is just that over time maturity of understanding the questions you're asking is really important, because it gets back to the data fusion part's just hard, right? I mean, and it's a lot of different stuff, but really understanding some of the questions that folks are asking and not trying to kind of boil the ocean in your approach. But the governance piece is a piece that's going to be critical, right? And not to harp back on ICAM, right? But that's a great example of like how important that is to get that right. It's understanding those problem sets and then being able to digitally, right, enforce how people can and can't access data, and that starts getting at some of their problems. The good thing is that across the spectrum, right, I think from a mission area perspective, we're seeing that growth. On the cyber side, definitely we see that. On the intel side, definitely we're seeing that. Business systems, definitely we're seeing it. I think we really got to now start focusing on how we see that across the entire Army. I think we're going to try to drive a lot of that through governance. But the other piece is working some of that policy stuff. Like, we don't have an API policy in the Army right now, which we're working on. It's coming out soon. We'll make sure it gets published for everyone to see. But really to start guiding some of the folks, and I know Mark's being, from his previous role, a beneficiary of being one of the first folks to actually get an API structure out for intelligence systems or for sensors that folks can pivot off. So there's a lot of work that's being done in this space. It's like everything else, it's working that cultural piece still to get moving. Does that answer your question?
Hey, good afternoon. General Salisbury, Compo 3. So for those, I really appreciate the bring your own device. It was really meant for the E4s and below, but as a GO, I will tell you, this is my best device. It's my personal device. For all of you in Compo 2 and 3, if you're not using it, this has been the best thing ever since sliced bread. I just want us to continue to build in that space, because I can partition at any moment in my phone and build in my personal life as a two-time citizen soldier, and then walk into my Army world at any moment, wherever I want and when I want. So thank you.
In our virtualized environments, between the VDI and what you just handed out, we've got almost 60,000 users in that environment right now. So rest assured, we're going to be building off of it.
If any of you want to see it, I can show it takes me less than 5 seconds to log into the other side of my life. Thank you.
General Salisbury, I want to welcome you to the Unified Network. Thanks for participating in this experiment.
We have time for one more.
One more.
I had the first one, so I've got the last one. For one unified network, the question of cybersecurity has not come up. If I'm a black hat hacker, can I get into the one system and wreak havoc?
No. Is there a follow-on question? I think the better visibility that you're going to have, the the better visibility of the data, where we want it, being able to ask the questions that we need of it, not have excess tools that aren't really giving us that return on investment, being able to trade that in and make the better investment in how we want to, continuous monitoring in our network, full period red team capability in our network, poking around, finding misconfigurations, finding where, and it evolves. The adversary is not static, and our network shouldn't be static. Whether it's one network or 50, I'd rather repair one. And so I realize that I've been asked this question before, hey, if you flatten everything, doesn't that allow somebody to come in and move laterally really fast? Yes, but I can see them coming, right? And I can control that a whole lot better. And we've got to do this at a speed, really, that you only have to take a look out in open source, what's happening with ransomware and other activities to know how fast and at what scale they're operating. And what happens when they start to use AI in their own attacks. And I don't care if you're a nation state adversary or a common ransomware family, that if they're going to do that, now I need to be able to employ AI and ML across the network in order to do this in real time. And so that's the full explanation of no.
I would just add, so think about it. You heard the chief yesterday talk about simple and intuitive and raising complexity up. If you don't have that end-to-end visibility, strategic, operational, and tactical, and can see all the way down, you don't achieve two things. You don't get that complexity moving up, and you never achieve zero trust, because you're trying to implement zero trust in little pockets. And by that definition, you're going to end up with a very fragmented network that you can't see. You can't implement zero trust, and you sure as hell can't maneuver it. And so we've got to get this portion of it right.
Hey, how we doing? Dr. Smoots, CIO G6. So we just unified the network, right? So a lot of data's coming in, data centricity due to data plan. The OSD has did the Chief Data Analytics, Chief Data Artificial Intelligence Office. Any thoughts on how the Army is aligned efforts to get under a CDO Artificial Intelligence?
So I'll speak a little bit on my last job. So at PUI EWS, they partnered with CDAO to do Project Lynchpin, right? And so the Army is not going out and doing AI ML on their own, right? We are building out an infrastructure to allow program managers, to allow industry an environment to experiment and deliver capability with AI ML. Now, we're at its infancy, right? And but we couldn't do it alone. No PEO can do it alone. I don't think the Army can do it alone. And so whether it's CDAO, Army Futures Command, ARL, C5ISR Center, a team getting after this, what we call Project Lynchpin. And I know as a PEO that of the network, we are going to need to leverage AI ML, and I am going to need an infrastructure to do that in. And we are going to leverage what comes out of CDAO and Project Lynchpin and that collaboration. I think that's all I was going to say.
Yeah, and I think across the enterprise, right? I think we have a CDO, who's managing kind of that data across the enterprise and really orchestrating where we're going, and that's the integration point into CDAO from a data perspective. I think we've actually done a really good split inside the Army right now. I think as we kind of mature in this space, you got ASALT really pushing hard on the Lynchpin stuff, trying to work through the acquisition process, trying to really think about what that's going to look like moving forward and how we integrate with the department. And then on the CIO side, really focus around the data and policy piece. Is there going to be a long-term one CDAO? I don't know if that's the right answer, right? I'll be frank. That is an approach. The Army may not be best organized for that approach. I think that we have equities in other areas, and we are man-trained and equipped across the Army in different ways to deliver capability. So I don't think we're looking at that quite yet. It's a great question. But I do think going back, the important pieces are starting off with Lynchpin, right? What's that incremental place? Where do we have that environment? How do we get industry in to test algorithms, right? How do we mature that space? How do we talk about adversarial AI, right? And where are we going to test some of that work? I think we're really moving with building that foundation. And then on the policy side, starting to shape those left and right limits, that guidance, right? I mean, something as simple as just getting an API policy out is actually a big deal, right? I think the next piece is let's talk about what our framework is to accept algorithms on the network, right? Are we going to centrally store that across the enterprise? I don't know. I think that there's a lot of work to be done in this space, and we're still too immature in the approach to start thinking about how we reorganize the Army for this. I think it really is. We've got the skill set where we have it right now. So how do we start moving the ball down the field? And as we start operationalizing ML capabilities at scale, I think that will much better inform. I think look at industry, right? And not every company out there has a chief data and analytics officer. In fact, most of the time those functions may be split and usually are. So I think we're going to continue to mature on this journey, and then we'll see what that looks like organizationally.
Hey, so we're out of time. The institutional change is really, really, really hard. But I would submit to you, institutional change is lasting, not episodic. So I hope you took that away. One owner of the network from an operational perspective, one delivering the network, and then unified governance, excuse the pun, up at HQDA to make sure that we synchronize, integrate, prioritize requirements, and then align resources to those requirements. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and please keep the cards and letters coming.